One of the fastest growing podcasts in the world collapsed overnight. No slow fade, no gradual decline, just a sudden and brutal end. And this wasn't some small project quietly fading into irrelevance. Cancelled was a cultural storm. It topped Spotify and Apple charts in multiple countries. It sold out live tours across the US, even in the UK with massive venues, and its clips pulled millions upon millions of views across YouTube and TikTok. On the outside, it looked untouchable, a juggernaut built to last. But the outside rarely tells the whole story. Beneath the surface, cracks had been forming for years. Whispers of tension, subtle resentment, the weight of scandals that never truly disappeared. Fans thought they were watching a comedy drama podcast, but what they were really seeing was the slow-motion collapse of a friendship and a brand. So why would a podcast at its absolute peak vanish in the blink of an eye? To answer that, we have to rewind to the messy, complicated history between its two hosts. Tana Mongeau had already mastered the art of surviving chaos long before the first episode aired. From the very beginning of her YouTube career, she positioned herself as the internet's wild child, unfiltered, reckless, and never afraid to overshare the kind of stories most influencers would take to the grave. She turned the most humiliating, disastrous, and scandalous chapters of her life into entertainment. Every mistake became content. Every cancellation became fuel. And instead of breaking her, the constant backlash only made her bigger. Where others would crumble under controversy, Tana turned it into her brand. So when she launched a podcast called Cancelled, the name itself was a declaration of war. It was Tana saying, "You can't take me down. I've already taken the word you'd use against me, and I own it now." And almost instantly, the gamble worked. The show exploded out of nowhere. Clips dominated TikTok's For You page. Fans packed entire theaters for live tapings. The podcast rocketed to #1 on streaming charts in country after country. Within months, Cancelled had transformed from an experiment into one of the most influential pop culture podcasts on the planet. It looked like Tana had pulled off the impossible, turning her unpredictable chaos into one of the most successful, structured projects of her career. But here's the thing. From the very first episode, there was an uneasy detail fans couldn't ignore. Because even though the podcast carried Tana's name, she wasn't the only voice behind the mic. That second voice belonged to Brooke Schofield. At the time, Brooke wasn't a household name. She wasn't a massive influencer. She was Tana's friend, someone Tana trusted to sit beside her, bring balance to the chaos, and keep the conversations sharp. But the problem was, Brooke wasn't starting from zero. She was starting from a deficit. Years earlier, Tana had told one of her infamous story times, a tale of betrayal. She described how a guy she was seeing had hooked up with one of her friends during a party in the most humiliating way possible. That story, messy even by Tana's standards, became infamous in her fandom. It was remembered simply as the Mindy situation. For a long time, the identity of Mindy was a mystery, a faceless villain in Tana's saga. But the internet is relentless, and eventually, the dots were connected. Mindy wasn't just some random ex-friend. It was Brooke, the very same Brooke now sitting on Tana's podcast couch as her official co-host. That revelation was a ticking time bomb. For a portion of the audience, Brooke wasn't Tana's partner. She wasn't the witty balance to Tana's chaos. She was the betrayer, the one who had crossed Tana in the past and somehow ended up rewarded with a spotlight. And first impressions? They stick like glue. From day one, Brooke carried the shadow of the Mindy situation like a scarlet letter. Every awkward laugh, every sarcastic comment, every quiet moment of discomfort, fans judged it all through that lens. Even as the podcast numbers skyrocketed, Brooke was fighting an invisible enemy. Not Tana, not another influencer, but the very audience watching her. And yet, despite all of that, Cancelled thrived. The formula worked better than anyone could have predicted. Tana brought chaos, outrageous stories, impulsive confessions, and zero filter. Brooke brought contrast, dry humor, self-deprecating jokes, and the kind of grounded energy that made their dynamic addictive. Together, they became lightning in a bottle. Clips from the podcast dominated the internet. Even people who had never sat through a full episode couldn't escape the viral snippets. Brooke joking about overdrafting her account because she was sponsoring a child overseas. A moment so darkly funny, it spread everywhere. Tana blurting out shocking confessions mid-conversation, leaving her co-host stunned. It was raw, it was unpolished, and it was addictive. Guest episodes pushed the podcast into the stratosphere. When comedian Matt Rife appeared, Brooke shut him down with a savage joke that spread like wildfire. When Tana surprised Brooke with Josh Peck from Drake and Josh, her emotional reaction instantly went viral. These weren't just podcast moments. They were cultural events. By then, Cancelled wasn't just another influencer podcast. It was a spectacle, a show that felt impossible to ignore. But here's the irony. The same raw honesty and chaos that made Cancelled go viral was also laying the seeds of its destruction. Because when you build a brand on exposing drama, you can't control when that drama turns inward. But success always comes with a cost. The same audience that fueled the show's rise began to dissect it under a harsher light. Upload delays and skipped weeks irritated fans who had worked the show into their routines. Missing an episode here and there might not sound like much, but to a growing fan base hungry for consistency, it became a red flag. Rumors started to swirl. Fans clipped awkward exchanges, analyzing body language and tone. Suddenly, harmless disagreements looked like proof of deeper conflict. TikTok was flooded with edits painting Tana and Brooke as enemies pretending to be friends. What once felt like fun tension now looked uncomfortable. Watching the show stopped being entertainment for some. It became surveillance. Viewers weren't just listening. They were hunting for signs of collapse. And they didn't have to wait long. The breaking point didn't come from an awkward clip or a missed upload. It came from the past, a past that refused to stay buried. Old tweets from Brooke resurfaced, posts written years earlier, offensive and impossible to defend, began circulating across Twitter and TikTok. The backlash was instant and merciless. Screenshots spread like wildfire, creators made reaction videos, and hashtags calling her out trended for days. For Brooke, it was a nightmare. But for the podcast, it was an earthquake. Tana had no choice but to act. In a tense, almost uncomfortable episode, she sat alone on the couch where Brooke usually was and delivered the news. Brooke was suspended. Her tone was serious, her words sharper than usual. She didn't sugarcoat it. She called the tweets horrific and admitted that, as a white woman, she couldn't even begin to imagine how painful it must have been for Black fans to read them. It was the first time the podcast felt less like entertainment and more like a public trial. Weeks passed. Brooke was gone, and in her absence, speculation only grew louder. Would she ever return? Was the podcast over? Was this the end of their friendship? By the time she finally did come back, the damage was already permanent. The audience never forgave her. Comment sections were merciless, filled with anger, disappointment, and outright ridicule. Every clip featuring Brooke was swarmed with negativity. Even moments that once would have been seen as lighthearted were reframed as fake, forced, or uncomfortable. And the chemistry? It was gone. What had once been chaotic fun now felt heavy. The banter was laced with tension, the energy off balance. Viewers who had once laughed at the duo's dynamic now felt like they were intruding on something broken. For many fans, Brooke's scandal wasn't just a personal mistake she made years earlier. It was the exact moment Cancelled lost its spark, the day the podcast's soul began to fade. After Brooke's suspension, Cancelled was never the same. The easy banter that once hooked millions suddenly felt strained, like the spark had been snuffed out. Viewers picked up on it immediately. The laughter that used to come so naturally now sounded forced, almost scripted. Jokes landed heavier, edged with tension, and the chemistry that had once been the show's strongest weapon was gone, replaced by awkward silences and clipped exchanges. Clips began spreading across TikTok, not of funny moments, but of tension. Brooke's body language stiffening when Tana interrupted her. Tana's eyes darting toward the camera when Brooke spoke too long, rolling them as if she couldn't be bothered. What once looked like partners bouncing off each other now looked like rivals trapped on the same stage. Brooke didn't hide how badly the hate was affecting her. She admitted openly that the constant flood of negative comments ruined her days. But instead of earning sympathy, her vulnerability gave critics more ammunition. Each time she mentioned the toll it took on her, the comments grew harsher, mocking her for not being able to handle the spotlight. Meanwhile, Tana's demeanor only grew colder. Fans noticed she seemed detached, as if she had already emotionally moved past the partnership. She still showed up, still performed, but the effort looked minimal, like her mind was already on her next project, while Brooke was left fighting for survival in real time. The cracks weren't hidden anymore. They were glaring. The magic that once made Cancelled a cultural phenomenon had soured into something uncomfortable to watch, and the audience wasn't laughing anymore. They were dissecting every moment, waiting for the inevitable collapse. That collapse came in the most shocking way possible. In the middle of an episode, almost as if it were nothing, Tana floated the idea of deleting every single cancelled episode. She said it casually, like a throwaway thought, but Brooke's stunned reaction revealed just how serious it felt. The internet exploded. Deleting the archive wasn't just about erasing old content. It was about erasing Brooke's presence, her contribution, and her entire role in the podcast's success. Years of work, viral clips, tours, fan memories, all gone with the push of a button. For many fans, it felt like a power play. Tana reminding everyone who really owned the channel, who really controlled the brand, and who could decide its fate. Brooke, in this version of events, was never a true partner. She was a temporary co-host, a name that could be wiped away as easily as she had been added. The community fractured. Suddenly, it wasn't just about the podcast, it was about loyalty. Team Tana and Team Brooke began trending as fans chose sides, fueling even more tension between the two. What was once a show about laughing at drama had become a drama in itself. And then came the moment that pushed it over the edge. In the same conversation, Tana compared their fallout to a celebrity cheating scandal, throwing out the comparison almost mockingly, as if the betrayal itself was entertainment. Brooke sat in silence, her expression frozen, while Tana spoke. It was no longer subtle. The betrayal wasn't whispered in the comments. It wasn't speculated in fan theories. It was happening live, broadcast for millions to witness. The partnership that had built an empire had finally turned into a public spectacle of its own destruction. Finally, the inevitable happened. Tana and Brooke announced that Cancelled was over. They released back-to-back videos explaining the decision, one titled, "Why the Cancelled Podcast is Ending," and another, "The Truth About Cancelled Ending." Fans who had spent months dissecting every look and argument finally had their answer. And yet, the reaction was bittersweet. For years, the loudest voices in the audience had torn Brooke apart and predicted the show's collapse. But the moment it ended, the community suddenly turned nostalgic. People flooded the comments with sadness, remembering the funny moments, the viral clips, and the energy that once made the podcast so magnetic. It was over. And for the first time, even the haters realized they would miss it. With the podcast gone, both Tana and Brooke were left to face the aftermath. For Tana, the future looked stable. She had her own massive following, other projects, and enough influence to pivot into something new. Cancelled had been a success, but it wasn't her only lifeline. For Brooke, the situation was much more uncertain. Cancelled was the platform that built her name, and now it was gone. Her personal content existed, but nothing came close to the reach or momentum she had alongside Tana. Fans wondered, without Cancelled, could Brooke stand on her own? The imbalance was obvious. Tana had the power. Brooke carried the fallout. And with the episodes themselves at risk of deletion, even Brooke's legacy from the podcast felt fragile. The story of Cancelled is more than just drama between two influencers. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when a brand is built on chaos. The same drama that made the show explode also poisoned it from the inside. Fans demanded conflict, and when the hosts stopped delivering it, the audience created their own, until the tension became real. At the end of the day, Cancelled didn't just collapse because of scandal or betrayal. It collapsed because it was designed to. A show that lives on drama will eventually turn that drama inward. And maybe that's the real question. Was Tana always in control, pulling the strings, or were both hosts just victims of an audience that wanted them to burn?